All right. Good morning, beautiful beautiful people in the house. Good morning, good morning, good morning, good morning. Thank you. All right. We have endured like
Hard to hear him.
We can't hear us. Okay.
Right? However, I have good news for you. If you remember the last time, sorry, if you remember the last time, right? It was a really heavy lift. Today's half that. So that's the good news, right? So I feel that you guys, having had all that under your belt last time, are going to find today to actually be a really educational opportunity. It's going to really give you a better sense of how your program is structured, what might be things that you will have discussions about going forward, curriculum-wise. We're going to sort of point out what you're doing exceptionally well and what you had maybe thought a lot about in the past and be excited about tackling going forward. So I'm going to let Lauren educate you to the highest level. Standards of education at this point are so high. Afterwards, you can assess it. You didn't think so. But I know you guys are going to knock this one out of the park. Thank you all for your time. Let me know if you need anything. It's an area where I can actually solve problems on this side of the game. All right? So thank you again. Begin.
All right, guys. Good morning, and thank you to Christopher. I don't know if my voice would have recovered from like shouting over you. I'm battling a cold, but thank you so much. And thank you all so much for being here. I know that, especially with the crazy start to the semester, all of your time is really valuable. So I really appreciate you guys being here and being a part of our time today. Are we okay with being backed up? Can you hear me okay? All right. I don't want to yell more than I have to save my voice, but I also want to make sure that you guys can all, put on my teacher voices for death. So today we're really going to start working on that second half of our project for the year, right? We're here to tackle that curriculum mapping piece. So our time today for this morning, we're going to be talking about a little bit of like the theoretical background, like the purpose, why we're doing it, and then really just dive into that very nitty gritty, right? Process, procedure, how we're going to get this work accomplished. Like Christopher already said, this is a much lighter load than last semester. You guys were champs last semester. It was amazing. And so I think you'll find this part a little bit easier to navigate and process. So just to kind of do a quick recap before we dive in today, we have already in kind of our time together, right? We've already talked about some of these new processes and new structures. We've learned about goals, objectives, right? Outcomes, writing those outcomes, and now we're starting to see how all of these pieces are going to start to fit together, right? That's our work this semester, and then towards the end of this semester, that's when we're really going to start rolling out some of these new processes and new procedures. The other thing I wanted to just mention before I jump into some of the content today is in a group this size, as well as our colleagues who are going to be watching the recording afterwards, we, in conversations this past semester, we really are at different levels. So as I'm kind of providing this content, if you are more advanced, right, this seems like a review, you've done this work before, I would appreciate just kind of the lens of approaching it in terms of we're all getting on the same page, right? So even if you have this experience, you have this knowledge, we're just kind of setting that baseline for all of us together as this work. And if this is new for you, right, great, right? That's why we're here, that's why we're doing that. So I just know that we are at different levels, and so this is just kind of an opportunity to do a little bit of norming, right, of our terminology, our language, our vocabulary. So I just appreciate kind of as we jump into that work, taking that lens. And then also at any point in time, please feel free to jump in, ask questions, add some commentary, right, or your experience. I really appreciate that as well. Also, my voice would appreciate that. So just, all right. So we'll go ahead and get started. So on the agenda today, again, talking a little bit about that curriculum mapping content. We're going to do a break for question and answers, really have some of that dialogue, right? So we really are grasping these concepts together. There are going to be a quick break. Then we're going to dive into this piece of processes and procedures. On our reflection from last semester, right, our assessment process of how things went, hearing feedback from you guys, want to just make sure we take that time to pause and make sure it's very, very clear in terms of process, procedure, right, documentation, exactly what we're expecting from you, and then also exactly how you're turning this in, right? So just very clear path, a clear time to lay out processes and procedures. We take away as much confusion as possible and minimize any frustration in terms of just actually filling out documentation and turning those deliverables in. So we'll take some time to talk about that, and then we turn it over to our open working session, right? So that a little bit before lunch, because there's not as much content to cover. So before lunch, there'll be open working. Then we'll work during lunch. We'll have people come in, and then we're going to be in this room till 2:30 to answer questions, help you with any of the content that you might need. Okay. Any questions off the bat on that or agenda for today? All right, and let's dig into some of our content around curriculum mapping. So again, starting off with just that really baseline, what is mapping? Why are we doing this? So the idea of curriculum mapping, and this is at any level, right? Today we're going to talk about both program level, also our general education outcome mapping, but this is going to apply to both of kind of those levels between our program and our general education outcomes. What is mapping? Really, really basically, it's an overview of the structure of the curriculum. So again, this applies both to our gen ed curriculum and then also our programs. And mapping really documents where different learning outcomes are addressed within a course or a program. So it's very kind of basic level, that's what it is doing. Creates a visual reference of any gaps, such as learning outcomes that are not addressed in courses, or courses that do not address learning outcomes. And I want to emphasize that as we're digging into our work today and maybe this week before you turn to those deliverables, if you identify gaps, that is okay, right? As we're kind of putting the maps together, it's going to be a little bit of a puzzle piece, but as you're doing it, if there are gaps, that is exactly what this process, this activity is intended to do. So if everything fits together perfectly, right, that's great. But at the same time, our curriculum is kind of this living, breathing organism that's developing really organically. And if there are some gaps or some things that maybe need to be addressed in the future, that's okay. That's where we start this conversation. Okay. So I just want to be aware that it's not just a graph that needs to be completely filled out, right? So check that box. But if there are gaps, there are things that we're identifying, that's great. Let's start the conversation. That's exactly what we're after. So this is a really basic example. I'm going to give you more specific examples of what the templates actually look like, but just as a kind of a baseline to work off of, this is a really typical kind of curriculum map. Over here on the left-hand side, we have our learning outcomes. Okay, you're going to see the ones that you wrote last semester, right, building into this work today. And then across the top, we have list of courses. So it is very, very basic level, saying that this course, like course 1, is meeting learning outcome 1. Course 1 is also providing students the opportunity to meet learning outcome number 3. And then you can also see progression through courses. So for example, learning outcome 1 is addressed in course 1, maybe that's introduced, it's developed in course 2, and then it's further built upon in course 3. Right? Do you have any questions on kind of this structure? This is a very, very basic format. Again, we're going to look at the specific templates we're going to be filling out today, but that's the basic overview. Any questions on that piece? We're all tracking? Great. All right, so you may have seen maps like this in the past. I've seen them kind of floating around, right, or different documentation, maybe updated, maybe not. Maybe you have to fill them out for your accreditors, right? So we might be at different levels in terms of filling out maps like this. What I want to say about maps with the X's is that an X doesn't tell us all that much about how a learning outcome is being addressed in a course, in a learning experience, in an activity, or in a program. So marking the X does make that link, but it's really helpful to have additional information about this, especially when we're talking about using these maps to start looking towards our assessment processes, right? So if it's just the X, we're missing the degree component. component and some layers there. So we need a little bit more context to further understanding of when, where, and how learning outcomes are being addressed. Yes?
So with this slide and also with assessment, I really struggle with putting down what is assessed or addressed in a paper project, whatever, because this one course I oversee has 16 different adjuncts teaching it. So what is the point of me saying how things are addressed when it would only be my little 2% of the class being done? And I don't know if you can even address that, but
I think we need to address it. That's a really important question. I don't know if we're going to fully address it in our time here today, but that is absolutely the point of the work that we're doing, right? If we are saying that in this specific course, right, students are meeting or learning these outcomes, right? And then, like we said last semester, as a result of this program, students are going to learn this. It is incredibly important that we are ensuring the quality of our education for all of our students that walk through the door, right? Regardless of instructor, regardless, right? So that is part of our quality assurance as an educational institution. So that is something that I'm very passionate about, right, is ensuring that quality. And I think that that's a conversation that we need to have, right? Again, I don't know if that's going to be something that we directly can address today in our class time or this class time here, but I think that that's absolutely a conversation that as a whole, right, as faculty, we need to be having that conversation. So does that at least help partially address? I think it's a really important one. Yeah.
And I want to jump in and just add any piece on top of that. Right? We already have a system in place which, in theory, right, should align the teaching of the topic across sections, right? The course outline, right, which is a curriculum document, right? So that should be how each instructor, whether they're at full-time, should be building their course. Because as an institution, we have approved in this course, we will learn these particular outcomes. How you get there as an instructor, right, is your academic freedom. But the assertion we make as an institution is that those outcomes will be addressed in class. So part of this map then is to go connect those two documents, right? The last time we were in this room, we created a brand new curriculum document, which was the program level outcomes. And today we're going to try to take the existing course level outcomes and connect them to the document we did last time. So how that then ultimately translates into how do we get our adjuncts teaching to the outcome, right, is another conversation entirely. But for you to discuss today, because you're not the only person in that situation, right? This is probably fairly common. We have strong reliance on adjuncts for teaching in this institution. Your task today is to align the course to the program. Or we're kind of creating more than just a map for curriculum, it's a roadmap for teaching, so that anyone who comes into this institution, whether it's a new full-time or a new adjunct, has some sort of starting point to base their course development. Does that make sense?
I also think if you leave the topics broad, completed through assignments or group project, and then faculty has their own freedom.
Yeah, so just to like a comment on that, and I just want to make sure that was clear, maybe that was a piece of your question that I didn't address, is that we're just going to be saying to what extent these outcomes are met in particular courses based off the course outline. We're not assigning assignments or saying how. Okay? We're making the map, we're saying they'll be met, so maybe that was a piece of your question that I didn't fully address. We are not indicating how today. Okay? Great question. All right, let's go ahead. So this is an example of that, and this is the vocabulary we're going to be using during our time today. Is on the learning outcomes, and this is for courses, for a program map, but this is going to apply to our general education maps as well. We're going to use the language introduced, developed, and mastered. So that's going to add a little bit more context, a little bit more nuance to the level of learning that's expected. And so, for example, in this table, the learning outcome 1 is introduced in course 1. It is developed in course 2, and then it's mastered at course 3. And I want to be clear about that vocabulary. That vocabulary pertains specifically to the learning outcomes that are either the course outcomes or the program outcomes that we wrote. So when we're talking about mastery, we're talking about that level of mastery. Does that make sense? So last semester, we really talked about the appropriate level of those learning outcomes, making sure that they're appropriate for our students, for our curriculum, for the 2-year environment. And so when we're talking about introduced, developed, and mastered, we're really talking about that on the 2-year, in the 2-year environment. Does that make sense? Okay. And so as we're doing this process, as you're thinking through and thinking really deeply about your curriculum and about those learning outcomes, if you start to say, well, actually, I don't know if this learning outcome, if they really do master it to this level within these courses. Either that's an adjustment on the curriculum side, like we want them to, and so we need to think about our curriculum and how we get our students there, or maybe that learning outcome that I wrote, right, wasn't quite appropriate for this, and that's that iterative process of consistently revising our curriculum and our learning outcomes. Does that make sense? Okay, so again, this is the start of a conversation. This is not, a concrete document where you have to make all the puzzle pieces fit today. Excuse me. But it's a beginning point to start these conversations to really improve our curriculum and think very deeply about what we want our students to be able to do as a result of their experience in our classroom. Yeah?
When we, as nursing, were relooking at our learning outcomes for our program, we realized that we do need to make some changes for them, especially with accreditation coming in February.
Yeah.
So when we look at this, are we able to do that? I mean, are we able to make some changes in those program outcomes, what you call program outcomes? Are we able to change that at all?
This is the start of that iterative process. So if you, as a result of our time here today or engaging those conversations, feel like you need to revise those, great, right? I mean, just because we did it last semester does not mean that's what you're stuck with for the next 5 years, right? And so you just go through the appropriate curriculum process to revise those outcomes. Absolutely. And this is something that we're going to be doing hopefully on a really regular basis as a result of this work. Okay? I don't even know if we're going to need that question and answer time. We're getting plowed through some today. All right, so let's talk a little bit more about the purpose of mapping. So I think it's really helpful, right, to understand what we're after, where we're going, in order to really add some meaning to this work today. So the purpose of curriculum mapping, again, both at the program and in the general education outcome level, is to provide an overview of the structure of the curriculum and the contribution of individual courses or learning experiences to learning outcomes, right? So in your program, it's the contribution of those courses to your program outcomes, and when we're talking about general education, it's how our courses contribute to those general education outcomes. So the mapping really identifies where and how particular outcomes are expected, explicitly taught or experienced, and then we're having this conversation with the idea of assessment in mind, right? Assessing how students are learning those outcomes. I'm going to finish slide right too. Helps us identify the strengths or student learning outcomes that are thoroughly addressed, but then it also helps us identify gaps or learning outcomes that are addressed by only a few courses or learning experiences. And again, being very upfront, like all of that is okay, right? We have to have the document first, then we can kind of start to see some of the strengths or maybe some of the gaps in our curriculum. Yes, Antigone?
Are we doing this with the certificate? Really, does it matter which one we do?
When we are talking about programs, all of the academic programs on campus, so certificate, degree, all of what we call our academic programs on campus.
Do you want them all for next week?
So that is that's what we're doing. And then we need to have a conversation. If that deadline is not appropriate for the level, we can have that conversation. Can you repeat the question? She's asking about the deadline and the number of programs. So we're going to have one of these maps for each program, and then we can have those conversations.
So the curriculum has 8 different things, like 2 degrees and 5 or 6 certificates.
Yeah, for each program. So at each program that you wrote program level learning outcomes for last semester, you'll be doing a map for this semester. Yeah. And then mapping. Oh, Yes.
Do we do a separate curriculum map and for the academic, for the college learning outcomes? We're only doing our programs.
When we get in, let's get to the technical
Okay, got it.
pieces,
Got
and
it.
we will flush all of that out. So mapping, the process of mapping is inherently about alignment, right? So it's aligning our curriculum. And it's a I love this quotation by Jankowski. It's a mechanism by which to counteract incoherence or fragmentation of the college experience. So it's really about that alignment of the curriculum and making sure that all of our courses, right, and all of our programs, right, we have that alignment in our curriculum. So some of the framing questions when we're thinking about maps, and we just want to have that dialogue today. So we're having that conversation. We have the same expectations. So the idea is there agreement on the criteria to include a course or learning experience on a map in relation to a learning outcome? So we're looking at our maps. We want to make sure that we're thinking deeply, right, about the learning outcome, the courses that we have, and what are the criteria for including that on the map? So what is necessary for a learning experience to be included in a map? So when we are doing that connection, right, we are indicating whether it's introduced, whether it's developed, or whether it's mastered, really thinking about what is a part of that course outline. How do we know that it's mapped at each level? And that's something that's going to be a dialogue and a conversation maybe with your colleagues around the table as you are thinking deeply about that curriculum and that course. What are the criteria for indicating that's introduced, right? Is that just in a class period you talk about that topic, right? Is there a learning experience that's associated with that outcome? What's the criteria for it being developed? And what is the criteria for being mastered? And as content experts, right, these are the conversations we're having both with ourselves, with our colleagues, to determine that. And so that's, as you as content area expertise, it's going to be hard for me to tell you the line between introduced or developed and mastered, but that's where you as content area expertise experts come in and inform that conversation, right? So there's not going to be clear guidelines I'm going to give you today, but that's you as the content area expertise making those determinations, and again, thinking deeply about the curriculum, right? And then what questions will the map be able to answer in order to inform improvement of our learning experiences? So again, we're mapping that curriculum, creating that alignment, and the purpose is that when we go to assess our content, when we go to assess student learning in those areas, we know the level that we're expecting, right? When we look at our curriculum, we say, okay, where can I assess these program outcomes? We're taking a look at the courses that maybe we indicated developed or mastered, and that's the courses that we're going to pull from to see if our students have learned as a result of engaging with our program. Does that make sense? Do you have any questions on that?
It may well be an inappropriate time to ask this question, but I remember back in the presentation we heard at the beginning of the semester that the standard for this is based on progression to a four-year baccalaureate program. In my area, I am not sure that in the 2 years that somebody will study with me, that they actually demonstrate mastery of any of the things that they will then be taking with them to a senior institution. So my concern is not so much how I describe what level of expertise they've achieved, as much as how we interface with senior institutions. If in fact this becomes a method of engagement and discussion with them, so that there is some continuity to the assessment of introductory development or mastery of a particular topic or skill. I know this is a really philosophical question, but I thought it was
Beautiful question to engage with, right? And I think, again, as faculty with ownership over the curriculum, these are really deep, important questions that we need to be asking, right? As a result of my program, what level of learning do I expect from my students, right? That's not a question I can answer for you, but as faculty in that curriculum with ownership over that curriculum, those are questions we're asking ourselves, right? Is what kind of learning do I want my students to be able to demonstrate? And then, again, the vocabulary, I wanted to be clear, not necessarily mastery at the master's or the doctoral level, right? It's mastery at that 2-year level. Like, as we are setting up expectations for what our students should learn, what is that level that we expect them to have mastered at the 2-year level before they either enter the workforce or move on to a 4-year degree. So that is, as always, great questions, and I think these are the important ones that we need to be engaging with and asking, again, both ourselves and our colleagues. Yeah?
I want to follow up with what you said, because if we have courses where you develop, you introduce, develop, and master in the same course.
If that is something that you can tell me as a result of your curriculum, in 16 weeks, my students are introduced, they're developed, and they master, then, then okay, right? Then okay. But that's the idea of looking at that course, right? Ensuring that we talked way back when, right? The process of assessment is telling students what we want them to learn, giving them multiple opportunities to learn that, and then assessing how they learned it. So as you, as a contact area expertise, are telling me within that course outline, that is what your students are doing in that class, then okay, right? Then that's where you would mark that. Yeah. And again, it's just that process of reflecting on our curriculum and ensuring that we are ensuring that alignment, and that's where we are. Okay. Thanks, Francis. Yeah.
And then I just want one last thing, because was fantastic, and I think it's important for all of us to remember that what we're doing should be contextualized in our institution, right? All of us have advanced degrees, right? So we know the end point, and that we know our students aren't, they're only on their journey for point. But that's what we're teaching here, and so the expectation is on your map. When they've completed your program, they should have mastered your program level outcome. Your program level outcome should be written to the specific context of what it is our expectation is they will learn. So I just want to make sure that that's very clear if you're doing your mapping, that you're not thinking, oh, well, yes, but after 2 years here, they could constantly master this concept. No, it's not. It's not. But that outcome, program outcome, should have been mastered on what you teach, or your outcome, not written right, to what it is that we actually purport to do here. So just context-wise.
Yeah, thanks for adding that. Any more questions before we move on at this point? Okay. So let's talk a little bit more concretely about that program level curriculum mapping. Again, the work or deliverables this semester involve both the program level mapping and the gen ed mapping. And so we're going to talk about those in 2 pieces. So this is very specifically about the program level curriculum mapping. So program level curriculum mapping explores the relationships between the courses in a program and the program learning outcomes. Those are the ones that we wrote last semester, and then the courses in your program. This map documents that the learning outcomes are addressed by the courses of the program. So like Christopher referenced before, the last time we were here in the room, we were looking at our course outlines, we were developing program level outcomes, now we're connecting the two, right? So in which courses are students learning these program level learning outcomes? And again, we're using the vocabulary introduced, developed, and mastered to indicate the level of learning in those courses. So as we are mapping, we're indicating in this course if students have introduced, developed, and mastered. As Francis already mentioned, if multiple of those are taking place in a course, you will indicate that as well. Okay.
So, I'm sorry, Lauren.
Yes.
So if it's just one topic and over 15 weeks we introduce it, develop it, master it, it would have all 3 of those things in one.
If that is the case for your curriculum, yeah. Yeah. Right? So we are tying those 2, and if you are saying as a result of this one course in 16 weeks, students go from introduction to mastery of this outcome, then that is what you will indicate on the map.
Mastered, or should we
Do all 3. We'll just do like an I, comma, D, comma, N, comma. Yep. Because again, we're completing this with the end goal in mind. And the end goal in mind is that these maps are what we will reflect on to create assessments, right? That question of, in order to assess these program level outcomes, where have students learned them? You're going to look at that map to determine where should they be able to show mastery, where should they be able to show that they've developed, and where should they be able to say that they were introduced. And then I think it is important to note this all happened in one course, right? To be able to know that information, because then that's going to impact when you do the assessment, right? If you're doing it in the first 4 weeks of class, you know that they've only been introduced. You're going to want to wait until the last maybe 2 or 3 weeks of class for them to really show mastery of that content.
And it's only based on the level of the course that we use.
Yes.
If it's an introductory course, they clearly can't.
It's all based on the outcomes for that course, right? And so in that course, if the outcome is a specific level, it's introduction, developed, or mastery of that level, right? So again, just to reinforce that, we're not expecting master's level mastery or doctoral level in that course. It's what have you said that students should learn, and have they learned that? Yep. So we have control, again, as faculty, we have control over all of those pieces. Yeah.
Do you want, on the program level, do you also want a column there stating what assessments you have used to demonstrate that someone has mastery?
Not yet.
Not
and
yet.
We're going to talk about that as in the processes and procedures. So thank you for that question. But yeah, not yet on this documentation are we getting to how we're assessing them. And we're still rooted in the curriculum piece. Yeah.
When we have to argue to some level, we can't get too particular in how we're assessing, because then now we're starting to get into faculty freedom of how.
So this piece, right? All we're doing right now is making the connection with the end idea in mind of once we've said they should learn it and we've given them opportunities, then we're going to see have they learned it. That's the only piece. We're still very much deeply rooted in the curriculum piece of this. And again, in the processes and procedures, I'll kind of parse that out, but this is all very still deeply rooted in the curriculum piece. Looking forward to assessment, but still just making those connections within the curriculum. All right. So at the program level, kind of the purpose, what is this doing? It enables faculty to determine how learning is scaffolded over the course of the curriculum. So whether that's within a course and over the entire curriculum. It indicates how courses relate to each other, right? What is kind of my course and how does that fit in with the larger curriculum? I think, Christopher, I referenced this, right? But it allows new and also adjunct faculty to understand the role of different courses. One look at this kind of this graph, this table, and this visualization. Really quickly, we can start to see how if you just teach one course, right? How does that fit in with the larger structure? How does my course fit in with what other courses my colleagues are teaching within the same department? And how does my teaching fit in with that? And how does what students are learning in my course, how does that relate to their overall experience as we're moving through the program? And again, we've talked about this, but identifies strengths or gaps in addressing learning outcomes, and then identifies where and how program outcomes are expected, explicitly taught or experienced, and then looking again towards assessment. How do we know that students have learned what we say they're going to learn? So I know this is a little bit hard to see. You guys are going to have all this documentation, and I'm going to show you where we go through our process and procedures. But this is the earlier images were kind of an oversimplification, right? This is what you'll be working with, right? So this is the template for our program curriculum map. But, and we'll again get to this in a minute, this is very much so more, or I guess, more empty than what you will be receiving, because, oh, she's in here now, the fabulous Pamela Perry has helped us. Yes, we'll do a huge round of applause for her. You guys will see what you're getting, but you're getting with most of this filled in for you, right? So, yeah, thank you. We'll do 2 rounds of applause. The support piece, just like last semester, has been incredible. So here, where you see the fill-in, course, and outcomes, all of that will be filled out for you, as well as the information at the top. Say the link template, what you will be opening and receiving will be pre-populated. You will literally just be typing in IDs and N's, right? Can't you do that already? No. We were teaching you guys in the so this is just an example, right? So the program up here, I want to point out one thing because it is going to be blank on your map. and we can have longer, more conversation or questions about this. In the top, it's going to say it has a blank year rotational period. The default is going to be 3. So within a 3-year rotational period, I wanted to provide some flexibility. We wanted to provide some flexibility because I understand that there are some programs that have specialized accreditation that maybe is 1 or 2 years. So if you have a different accreditation cycle and that requires you to do it on a faster cycle, we wanted to provide that flexibility. But the default is going to be 3. So within a 3-year rotation, we'll be assessing all of these program learning outcomes. Okay, so that is blank. So other than the rest of it, you'll be putting a 3 in there and then filling out your IDs or Ms. Okay. Any questions on this template? Okay. So just some framing questions for us as we engage on the program level work. Are all the outcomes addressed, and are they addressed in a logical order, right? So just kind of looking at that, right? Answering those questions. Do all of the key courses address at least one outcome, right? The answers could be yes or no here. Do some outcomes get more coverage than others? And if so, is that intentional? If that is intentional by your curriculum design, right, those are choices that we make about our curriculum. So these are just, again, reflective framing questions. Are all outcomes first introduced and then reinforced, right? In our curriculum, do we want those to be separate courses, or as some of us have indicated, that's all happening within the same course, right? So just those reflections, those questions. Do students get practice on all of the outcomes before being assessed? Are there multiple opportunities for them to engage with that content before we expect them to have mastery over those outcomes? So again, all questions, and this is the foundation of that work, right? Some of us may have been engaging with these questions already. Some of us, this may be the first time we're asking some of these questions. That's 100% okay. This is the foundation to start having those conversations and that dialogue around our curriculum. Okay. Any questions at this point before we move on to the gen ed? All right. Oh, one other piece. Looking forward, I've already referenced this before, but the other layer of mapping at the program level is really exploring where learning will be assessed. And so some of those questions are, how do assignments elicit demonstrations of learning outcomes? How are we assessing it and where? How does our teaching prepare students to demonstrate their learning? And then how do individual faculty or courses contribute to this collective enterprise of helping students demonstrate their learning? Right, so these are just reflective questions, kind of looking forward. We're not dealing with that in this time today, but again, with that end purpose in mind, that's what's kind of helping informing our work that we're doing together. All right, general education mapping. So that was deliverable 1, piece 1. We're going to talk about that again in terms of the procedures and processes, but a little bit more details about our general education mapping. So general education mapping at its very core explores the relationships between the courses that we teach and our general education learning outcomes. Documents, right, this map is our documentation of where and how the general education outcomes are addressed by our courses. And we're going to be using the same kind of key. Level of learning is going to be indicated by that I for introduced, D for developed, or M for master. So this is an example of that blank curriculum map. Again, the one that you will be receiving has much more information about your specific courses. Now, I do want to indicate, so here we have the new general education outcomes written here. The courses are going to be listed on the left, and then our general education outcomes are listed there. And then this is a 5-year cycle. So the general education outcomes will be assessing 1 per year in a 5-year cycle. Okay, hopefully that's not new information. The difference between the program and the gen ed education maps, and we're going to be talking about this again in more of the processes. The program maps, each one of you will be filling that out for the program to which you are assigned, right? The work that you're doing while you're here. You wrote the program outcomes, you'll be filling out the program map. Because of the logistics in some of these programs, again, we're going to get to this, but I just want to mention here, because of how our curriculum is structured, right, our departments are structured, for some of you, the gen ed map has a list of all the courses in the department. So there's going to be a piece of collaborative work that's going to happen here. Okay? So there is going to be some work that's going to happen with your colleagues. As you see your colleagues across tables from you, if you're within the same department, you are going to have to do a little bit of work together to fill out that general education outcomes map. All of that, I will address that more in just a few moments, but that's going to be more of a department work together than just individual. So we'll get to that. So the general education maps and all actually both levels, both gen ed and our program level. The mapping is just as much about the process of seeing these relationships as it is about ticking boxes and filling out this spreadsheet or this table. So it really is about seeing these relationships. And then these maps and the lessons that are learned from them, right, as we dig into this, I've even just prepping for this workshop, I think Pamela, Christopher, and I have learned so much about our curriculum. Some of you may have gotten like swirling emails that have gone on this week of trying to chase down some loose ends and figure out where everything belongs. And so we've learned a ton in this process just prepping for you guys. So as engaging these conversations, there's going to be a lot that's going to be learned from this process. And those lessons need to be shared, right? We need to be in dialogue with other faculty on campus, whether in our departments, right, or elsewhere, used and updated. So again, talking in the little process and the procedures, we're talking about where these are going to be housed, right, how they're going to be updated. But this idea that this, again, is not just a check the box and move on, but we are going to be, this is an iterative process where it's going to inform some of our discussions moving forward, and then they will be updated and revised, and that will hopefully, again, start a conversation about our curriculum here today. Okay? There's our question and answer slide. So, yes?
When you look at the general education concepts that are there in your outcomes, are those concepts, some of them are in some of our program outcomes and some of them are not? I mean, is that an issue?
Some of the general education outcomes.
Concepts, for example, global literacy.
Mm-hmm.
When I look at our program outcomes, we don't exactly talk about that idea of global literacy. I mean, is that an issue for consistency and correlation?
So I would say if you look at the definition here, analyze and explore complex global challenges from diverse perspectives.
Right.
Do you see that in your content?
Yes.
Then you know.
We're open.
Yeah. It doesn't have to have the specific language, right? And then tying back to our work that we've slowly started to engage with the AAC new value rubrics. If you are sitting here today and you look at those and you say, I need more context, right? I need a little bit more around this to make those decisions. That's where I would point. These are rooted in the learning competencies that are described in the AAC new value rubrics, those kind of national tools, to tie it to more of a national standard. And so if you are saying like that global learning, the analyze, explore complex global challenges from diverse perspectives, I need more, right, of that. I need to understand a little bit more about that before I can map it. Then I would encourage you to, and I can help direct you there, is to pull up the AAC new value rubrics, and you're going to get all of those, like those domains, right, have a little bit more of a standard definition for what is involved in that, and then that can help point you to where that's being discussed in your curriculum. So great points. What other questions do we have? Did we do this all before? Do I have all your questions out? The other thing that I want to point out, which again, I'm going to talk about it with our processes and procedures, but with the gen ed education map, you are only going to be mapping the courses in your right? So for example, in your degree program, you will not be mapping the gen ed courses. You will only be mapping your program specific courses because, for example, in your degree program, let's say Ruth, right, if your students take Rhetoric 101, you're not going to be mapping Rhetoric 101, Couture is going to be mapping Rhetoric 101, right? So you will not be mapping other courses in the gen ed core. Those will be rooted within their departments, right? And so you're only going to be mapping the courses that your department offers. Is that clear? What other questions do you have for me? So we are having the deadline of all the maps being done by next week. So today, kind of be that encouragement of getting as many as you can today. The deadline for next week that's the same deadline. And again, the processes and procedures, we'll take a look at all those deadlines. Okay. All right, we're moving through this more quickly than on the agenda, which is great. We'll get working a little bit faster. So let's go ahead and take a let's say a 15-minute break. 15-minute break. Grab some coffee, grab some more snacks. We'll sit down, we'll grind through the process and procedures, we'll get started. Yeah. But even if the language isn't correct or the concept is so even if you say maybe they don't be able to teach that let's do like half of that, right? Of like, let's do, great, let's do the Gen Ed, that's fine. Let's do Gen Ed today, and then we can talk about programming. Because I don't want to say like, oh, you can right? Like this should be practice. All practice. I might jump on a laptop and do that. We'll find it out. Oh, okay. Also take a break.
I felt bad, like, leaving the meeting. I was just, I know.
Let me write it down. I think you guys would be great at that.
Yeah. No, I'm pretty good at the Tuesday one thing, so. Yeah, I know. Yeah. Yeah, that would be ALLY. Yeah, it's my nickname, so I don't really. But yeah, it's ALLY. That's great. And then
I mean, for all of us, being present, but
that would be fun. That's like the one that I was really interested in, but I don't have like two. Okay. I didn't want to step on her. I know. Okay, cool. All right. That would be fun.
can you send me sort of this next step of sending me
Yeah, and I know, let me also look at the April calendar because there's also the week of the child is April, and typically we have have an event for our students, and we already started planning that out. So I just want to make sure that I'm interfere with that. But either way, like,
Do you want or
yeah.
maybe two?
Okay.
Would you want to three? But then the second one, so once you do it once.
And I feel like my equal hopefully to the other pieces, my equal hopefully then will kind of put after it. That is happening. And then I also wanted to ask you in regards to the workshop. So what's the plan, like, are we planning on just leaving everybody, like, when the workshop is done, or are we planning on, just because I'm like,
We're gonna have plenty of time to talk about
okay, just because I made an appointment for later in the afternoon, and I wasn't sure if I should, like,
We're gonna have the time work.
okay,
So we're gonna have plenty of time.
okay. Okay, well, I just wanted to touch base. Yeah, I'm excited. Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
Hi, Robin.
So, it looks like some people have come on, just got my so much. So I'm just obviously.
The biggest part of we're out process the disclaimers that are coming back, how many people what we're teaching. Or just because I've been talking about speakers, then we can get more like theoretical and then probably really like what do I know? I'll take that after chat.
That's what we're getting.
But all of your speakers and all of your stuff.